This Week in Startups is brought to you by Squarespace. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use offer code TWIST to save 10% off on your first purchase of any website or domain. And by Asana. Find out why more than 30,000 companies with teams in 192 countries trust Asana. Visit asana.com/twist to sign up for free.
Hi, everyone. As mentioned, I lead growth marketing at Slac. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can think about going to market with your product and then growing your company. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background on me first. As I mentioned, I'm at Slac. I've been there about a year and a half, founded the growth marketing team and have built that up over time. Prior to Slac, I was at LinkedIn, where I ran a variety of product marketing teams, including the growth and lifecycle team. And then prior to that, I was at a very small startup called Climate Corp, which has some fun stories. And Climate Corp was eventually sold to Monsanto for a little over $1 billion about 5 years ago. So what I want to cover today is just how to think about some key business model fits and how you find those fits, how you think about growth, the key growth tactics and strategies, and then finally a little word about measurement. So before I talk about growth, I want to talk about finding fit. And people talk a lot about product market fit. It sounds like a really easy concept. It's one that's really easy to forget when you're in the midst of trying to build your company and you have an idea that you are sure is fantastic. And I know this because we made this mistake at Climate Corp, where the founders had a vision, they built up the product, they built up the company before asking anybody if they actually wanted that product. And the hard reality was nobody wanted that product because we didn't ask them. So we scaled before we found our product market fit, and it was really painful. So when we talk about product market fit, what do we talk about? There are a lot of definitions. I really like Mark Andreessen, who basically says product market fit means being a good market with a product that can satisfy that market. So if you break this down, what does this mean? Being in a good market means being in a market that is large enough to sustain your business. So you can envision a world where you have fantastic product market fit and your market is one person. So unless that person is Richard Branson and he's going to buy your spacecraft or whatever it is, it's probably not a good idea to build a company off of it. And then a product that can satisfy that market is obviously a product that satisfies a particular need that the market has. But the key thing is that product market fit is not the only fit that matters. And this is something that's often overlooked. So Brian Balfour recently came up with a really nice framework that I'm going to talk about a little bit today that he calls the market product channel model fit. And it's about how you have to master all of these fits if you're going to have a company that is successful and grows. So let's break down this model a little bit. So the first is the market. And as we said, the market is who you are selling to. And this is going to define your opportunity, right? So how big the market is really how big your company can grow. It's not always easy, right? Because defining the market correctly is not always simple. And a classic example that people quote is Uber, where the market was taxis, but it's actually not taxis. It's basically anything that needs to move from point A to point B. When you think about your market, you need to think about who are the people, what are the challenges that they're trying to solve? Do they know they have those challenges? Because it makes a difference if they realize they have them or not. And then do they care about them? Because sometimes they have a challenge, but they just don't care about it that much. So it's still not a particularly good market to enter. Product is obviously what you're selling. I won't dwell on this. And then product market fit, as we discussed, is if you are selling something that solves a real need of the market. When you go to the next fit, that's channel. And channel is about where you're selling it. So this can be online ads. This can be field sales. This can be a retail store, right? But how are you getting that product to the market? And Balfour's insight is really that you can't change the channel. You can only optimize your product to fit a channel. So an example of this is if you have a high volume, transactional, quick time to value product. So a good example is travel, like Priceline. Your channel can be online ads because people know what it is. They understand the need. They search for it. They buy it. They get the value from it right away. It works really well. If you have a low volume product that needs a lot of education, online ads is not going to work as well, right? Because people don't trust you enough to purchase the product. If you have a product that is inherently viral, you can use social. So LinkedIn works really well. Priceline strategy of we're going to go viral and that's how we're going to scale is clearly not going to work that well because the product isn't built for that channel. And then model is inherently about how much you're selling it for, right? So do you have a high cost, low volume model? Do you have a low cost, high volume model? And that's going to influence the channel that you sell in, because once again, a high volume, low cost model will work really well in ads. But something that is $1 million, good luck getting somebody to buy it online without speaking to a human being. You probably need something like field sales, consultative selling. That's the classic enterprise SaaS model. And you can't mix these up. So a classic mistake people have made is thinking that they have built a better mousetrap and now they can do an SEM ad for something that costs $500,000 because their product is so amazing and people are going to buy and it's the new way of working. This is not reality. And I can tell you from Slac, this is an evolution we had to go through. Slac now has a large field sales component. And then finally, market model fit. So again, if your model is low cost, high volume, and your market is 5 people, you fundamentally have a problem. So you have to make sure that your market and model fits. And the key is that all of these things need to work together for your business to scale successfully. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens when this goes wrong. And a classic example of that is Climate Corp, which I was partly to blame for, so I can talk about freely. Climate Corp actually had a lot of these fits correct, but what we got wrong fundamentally was the market. And what that means is there's a domino effect where everything else fails when one of your assumptions turns out to be untrue. So we'll walk through this a little bit. Climate Corp, which originally was called Weatherbill and we rebranded to sound more adult and sophisticated, was built on this concept that weather impacts 80% of businesses in the world, right? So if you're a ski resort and it's too warm, or you're NASCAR and it rains, or you're a grocery store and there's a snowstorm and you can't get your trucks through on time, there's real financial impact from the weather, and there's actually no way to mitigate that risk at that time. You could swap billion-dollar derivatives, and that was about it, which is obviously not super useful for most companies. So the founder said, wouldn't it be a great idea if we built a weather insurance product that was highly customizable, you can edit it online, and you can buy, easy contracts in just a few minutes, protect against weather risk just like you do flood insurance, car insurance, whatever it may be, and then you can have more predictable revenue. Market is huge because it's 80% of all businesses. The risk is clear, financial impact is obvious, so we clearly have a winner. And the answer is we do not have a winner. And the reason for that is that nobody understands weather risk, right? So the founders did because they spent years researching it. But if you ask your local bike shop if they suffer if there's 1 inch of rain or 2 inches of rain, and what are the dates that rain might fall, how much money are they going to lose, what if it's super hot, do they get fewer bike rentals on that day? They don't know. So a highly customized model just meant many, many opportunities to select the wrong inputs for something you've never heard about before and then hand over money to prevent losing money versus to make money. All things that make it particularly unattractive to a small business owner. But we didn't realize this at the time. We thought we were brilliant.
Yes, Squarespace. I love Squarespace. We use it for all of our event websites with dramatic, striking results. Beautiful websites. Go check out launchfestivalsydney.com. We're going to go to Sydney in June, and we're able to pop up that website in minutes using the incredible templates available to us at Squarespace. It's so powerful. It has full e-commerce functionality, so you can sell anything you want online, and you can customize that look and feel, the settings, with just a few clicks. And everybody in your organization can learn how to edit your website. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. And if you want to buy domains, you can choose from over 200 extensions. And of course, it comes with a never-ending list of features. They just keep adding features, but they keep the price the same. That's the beauty of software as a service. They have analytics, so you know how to grow. And built-in search engine optimization. You don't have to hire somebody to do that. It's all built in, as well as free and secure hosting. Now, if you need 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, award-winning customer support, it's there for you. But I'll be honest, I doubt you're going to need it because it's so simple and so easy to use. But it is nice to know that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're going to get that great customer support. So here is your call to action. Go check out squarespace.com for a free trial. Go ahead. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch your beautiful website, just use that offer code TWIST, T-W-I-S-T, to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Make it yourself and make it stand out with Squarespace. It's a great company, great people over there, and they hosted my first talk for my book, and I thank Anthony and the team over there for supporting us with that Great, great, beautiful space. If you're looking, by the way, just as a side note, this isn't in the ad copy, but if you're looking for a company to work at, oh my God, Squarespace has a gorgeous, gorgeous office, and what a great team. You could do a lot worse than working at Squarespace. It is pretty dope. Okay, and they're in New York, by the way. Well, let's get back to this amazing episode right now. Thanks again, Squarespace.
This market that we envisioned, this very large market, did not exist. It wasn't real. There was a market in here that was real that we eventually did figure out, and that is, it's a particular industry, right? Agriculture. So who has weather risk and they really know it, right? Deep in their bones? It's farmers. What specifically is the agriculture that has the most risk in terms of revenue? It's corn and soybean, because it turns out that's 80% of farming and they have very similar risks. Who's willing to spend a lot of money to protect their crops? It's farmers. So the market was there, but it was a different one than we originally envisioned, and it also is very different from the thousands of SMBs that we pictured. So what happened? So we got our market wrong, and because we got our market wrong, we got our product wrong. We built a product that could be customized by anybody online, highly iterable, but not specific. So you had to understand your own risk. We didn't tell you what it was. So the product market fit wasn't there. We ended up creating a correct product market fit by deeply understanding the risk that the farmers had and then serving it up to them. So instead of saying, hey, corn farmer, you got a lot of risk, go buy a contract, figure it out, we said, hey, we know that when your corn is I became an expert in agriculture. When your corn is pollinating, if there's low heat, it won't pollinate, you'll lose money. Here is a corn pollination heat stress. All we need to know is where is your farm located and how many acres do you have, which is something that people do have a great deal of confidence in. So you remove that risk. So we figured out what the product market fit was, but we had to fundamentally change the product based on the new market. Because we had our market wrong, we had our channels wrong. So the founders came from Google. This was about 10 years ago, and they believed the world was going to be transformed by AdWords and all businesses would be sold through AdWords, which, they weren't totally wrong, but they were a little bit wrong. It turns out that weather insurance does not work to be sold through AdWords. And there are a couple reasons why. It didn't exist before, so nobody's searching for it. People don't understand it. They land on a website and you're asking you to give a lot of money to a company you've never heard of. None of this is good for an AdWords channel. And again, because the product was very complex and the time to value was long, ads didn't work very well. What does work is field sales, right? So in the beginning, we did online ads, really poor. We eventually turned to field sales. Let me see if okay. We had our model wrong. So our model was a mass volume of cheap daily contracts. Turns out it should have been a couple of $1 million contracts a month, right? And again, your channel's going to change based on your model. And then finally, because our market was wrong, we didn't realize that we had to have really expensive contracts. We thought we were going to do this at scale, and $10 a pop would totally sustain us. Again, coming from Google and ads at scale. So what we did is we changed, as I mentioned, through a channel sales model through agents. It's expensive, highly consultative. Also, agriculture is a very relationship-based market. So you've got a farmer, he buys insurance from his crop insurance partner. His father bought insurance through that crop insurance agent's farmer, and on and on and on. It's really amazing. It goes back generations. They certainly don't trust a startup company from San Francisco where, as one person put it, Nancy Pelosi is from. So we needed to go through trusted agents. And again, you only know this by deeply knowing your market. Model, we went from high volume, low cost to low volume, high cost. And again, it all reflects the market of corn and soybean farmers. So how do you figure this out without spending a year and a half and a lot of money throwing things at the wall and failing and thinking you're going to go out of business? And the answer is really a customer development model, which Steve Blank has evangelized over the year. And the theory of customer development is that this is really, you can apply the scientific method to building up your business, right? So you have a hypothesis, you don't go all in, you test it, you prove it, you either iterate because it didn't work or you invest more deeply, which is a fundamental mistake that we made in the beginning of Climate Corp. So the first two stages of customer development are really about building out those 4 fits that Balfour talked about a lot. And the second are about scaling your business. So customer discovery is about understanding the problem your customer has and validating that it's real. Customer validation is validating that you can sell to them. So not only do they need to have a problem, they need to be willing to purchase a solution. Then company creation is about creating a scalable process to keep selling. And then company building is about operationalizing that process so you can scale. this very scientific chart illustrates the uncertainty and risk at different stages, right? So at the beginning, you really don't know what's going on. No matter how clever you think you are or how much you've thought deeply about it, there are a lot of false assumptions in here. And it is much cheaper, quicker, and less painful to correct those false assumptions early on than to go out and build a sales and marketing team and then say, whoops, guys, we got it wrong. We got to fire you all. We got to start from scratch. Do this at the beginning, don't do it at the end, and question all of your assumptions. So the question is, once you're doing this customer discovery process, how do you actually know that you have this fit? And there are a couple things that you can look for. One is organic growth. So organic growth in the very beginning is fundamentally word of mouth, right? People like your product enough that they will tell other people about it. Slack grew for years, and even now, off the back of this word of mouth. People liked it so much, they told their friend, who told their friend, who told their coworker. Second is payment. So again, it's one thing to use a product for free. It is a very different thing to part with $1 for it. And that is a breaking point that many companies painfully realize. So before you're going to invest a lot, make sure somebody's actually willing to pay you some money. It is not the same thing to use something for free. And finally, retention. And so retention is about repeated usage of your product. And the key thing here is that repeated usage is different depending on the engagement pattern that your product should have. So are you something that should be used once an hour? Is your product daily? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Is it yearly? Different products have different expectations for what the repeat usage should be. You got to figure that out and then make sure that you're hitting those markers. So like a newspaper would be a daily use case. If you're an apartment rental list, that's a little challenging because maybe it's once a year. So figuring out if you have retention is going to be a little hard and you're going to need to find a leading metric. And then finally, this is all about making the customer the center of your development process. And again, this sounds very obvious, but it is really, really easy to forget in the midst of everything that you're working on. And a classic example of this, I'll go back to Climate Corp, is when we did pricing for our insurance products. So, oh no, spoilers. Right. So at Climate Corp, we priced it what we thought was a pretty classic model, and that was, you want $100 of insurance coverage, pay us $10. Felt straightforward. What we discovered later on is that farmers don't budget that way. They budget in terms of acres. So they did not know what that meant when we said $100 of coverage for $10 payment. What they knew is that my corn is worth $200 an acre. I budgeted $30 per acre of corn to develop it. And then they know how that fits into their financial planning. We never would have known that if we hadn't talked to them a great deal, right? So this is where going out, spending time with them, spending time on the field. I went to Michigan and learned what a sugar beet looks like. Turns out it doesn't look like anything you thought. And then I learned what the risk for sugar beets were in terms of weather. And what the farmer told me is he took me out football fields worth of sugar beets, just piled up. This is February in, I think it was Michigan, so very cold. Everything's frozen. And his point was, if it starts to rise, the temperature, these will cook from the inside out, and I will lose everything. And so he was very concerned about heat in the midst of winter because that ruined his stockpile. And so learning that really helped us customize our products. So if you have fit, how do you grow, right? That's the next question. And a lot of people ask me how I do growth. And what I like to start with is that growth is a funnel, not a stage, right? So the big difference between growth and marketing historically is that marketing stops at acquisition and growth goes through the entire funnel. Because what you ultimately really care about is revenue. If you get people to try your product and never pay, it's still not that fantastic. So a lot of folks talk about the ARG metrics, and this is Dave McClure came up with this, pirate metrics, acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral. Acquisition is about how people find your product, right? How do they get to your website? How do they try out your tool? Activation is how do they get to the value of your product? So this is often onboarding and things like that. Retention, again, are they using it with the cadence that you think that they should? Revenue, are they willing to pay you money? And then referral is a little bit links back to acquisition, where if people aren't going to talk about your product, it's going to be a lot more challenging to grow. So a few thoughts on three of these: acquisition, activation, and retention. So first is that acquisition is all about product channel fit. Keep this in mind. all of these companies are very successful. They all acquire their customers in a very different way. So Slack right now, obviously word of mouth is big, but brand and content is where we're really investing. Slack is a new category. People are not that familiar with it. We have to educate them a lot. We have to make them aware. So we're investing a lot in the brand. LinkedIn, obviously viral loops, right? LinkedIn originated the address book import, which everybody loves so dearly, to spam all of your network to invite them to LinkedIn, but it's helped them grow exponentially. And the key about LinkedIn is that it becomes more valuable for its members the more people who are on it. So it's really primed for that viral loop. Climate Corp was all about channel partnerships, so it grew through sales, not through marketing. Again, because it is a new, expensive, consultative product, it needed that relationship. Two companies I didn't work for, Yelp, all about SEO. When you have a company where your users will create more content and they're motivated to continue creating more content, SEO is going to be really useful for you. Pinterest is another example. And then Priceline, as mentioned, works off of ads, high volume, low cost, quick time to value. Priceline is the largest purchaser of online ads. They spend $3 billion in a year.
Yes, Asana. I love Asana. I use it every day. My team uses it every day here at This Week in Startups. And if you're running a startup, you know your team needs to move quickly, but too often a lack of clarity slows everybody down. And that lack of clarity includes who is doing what, who's been assigned which tasks to do, and when is everyone's work due, and where can I find information? And also, how do we tackle routine work, things that have to happen every time? Like here at This Week in Startups, we have to upload the podcast, we have to share clips, we have to write show notes. There's a lot to do. And these repeatable tasks are very important to program in so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And that's where Asana comes in. Asana, Asana. It is the easiest way to manage your team's projects and tasks. Everyone will work faster and be more productive because they can see the plan and not miss milestones and deadlines like product launches, advertising campaigns, events. We're using it for Launch Festival Sydney to plan the scuba diving trip we're doing, all this great stuff. And you can create repeatable processes for reoccurring work like bug reports and creative requests. Everyone knows who's doing what and when. There is no confusion if you use Asana. Teams using Asana report it increases efficiency by, wait for it, 45%. There are now 30,000 plus companies with teams in 192 countries trusting Asana with their most important milestones and deadlines, including, wait for this, Airbnb, Uber, Thumbtack, Facebook, and Launch. And I am an investor in 3 of those companies, Uber, Thumbtack, and Launch. It can also integrate with hundreds of other apps like Google, Dropbox, and Slack, and that's really slick. So you can put in, hey, this task has been completed, and drop it into your chat room. So you can start using Asana today. Go to asana.com/twist. Go to Asana, A-S-A-N-A, asana.com/twist. It is a fantastic product. It is life-changing. And the product gets better and better. Every couple of weeks, there's some new feature in there that we find and we start using it. And I don't know if they're adding features constantly or we're just discovering them. But boy, we have become addicted to Asana and we are getting more done with less people than we ever have. So go ahead and check out asana.com/twist, asana.com/TWIST. Okay, let's get back to this amazing episode.
So activation. Activation is all about shrinking time to value. How do you get people to that aha moment faster? When people first try your product is when they're the most motivated to invest in education. You need to make it easy for them to understand. So one example of this is obviously onboarding. This is right when people are willing to go through all of the steps. They're the most motivated. Onboarding can dramatically increase the activation rate of your users if done correctly. So Slack's onboarding is fairly well known. We use Slackbot. People love it because, it's cute, it's human, it's simple. But what I like about Slackbot is it is the framework of the actual product, right? So it is onboarding via chat. It is a chat product. We are teaching you how to use the product in a fairly fun way while you're interacting with Slackbot. Another example is Stitch Fix. So Stitch Fix is trying to shrink time to value by making sure that that first box of clothing you get is awesome. The way they do that is by asking you what your style profile is, taking a quiz, personalizing it. And what's really important is that they tell you why they're asking you these questions. It's not just here's 50 questions that we want to ask you because we like to waste your time. Every question is, this is going to get us closer to providing you the clothing that you really love. And then finally, getting people to activate is also about showing them their progress so that they remain invested. So this is an example of LinkedIn's profile completion meter. It's fairly famous in terms of one of the most successful and earliest types of gamification. And this really hinges off of the concept of the endowment effect. So the endowment effect is the idea that once somebody's invested a little bit of effort, it's a little bit like sunk cost. They're going to go all the way. They spent a little bit of time. Let's complete it. So LinkedIn, every time you update your profile at all, they say, you've done this much, do a little bit more to get from beginner to intermediate to advanced. There's pretty much no way to get 100% on a LinkedIn profile, which drives people nuts, but is really effective in getting them to keep updating. And even when you know what LinkedIn is doing to you, it still works. You just can't help it. So finally is retention. And retention is getting people to come back. And this is all about increasing value and then pulling people back into the product. Because the more value you offer, the more people are going to stay with you. And then if they're not in the product, you need to find ways outside of the product to bring them back in. So this is email, SMS, text, things that are not inherent to the product. One of the best examples of a retention campaign is the LinkedIn Who's Viewed Your Profile email, which I'm pretty sure all of you are probably familiar with. This is sent to folks who are a little bit more on the dormant side, talking about who's viewed their profile. It doesn't tell you. You have to click through. And the kind of the mystery effect of this, as well as how much it plays on people's self-interest, everybody wants to know why they're popular and who's looking at them, is incredibly effective. This had really high click-through rates. The click-through rates do not degrade over time, no matter how many times you send this email. People cannot stop clicking on it. You ask them why, and they say, I don't know, but I want to know. Nobody has yet figured out a true use case for who's viewed your profile, except for LinkedIn, which monetizes it really well. But it's hooking into that psychology of wanting to be popular. And for LinkedIn, not only does it reactivate a lot of people, but it creates habits for them. So what happens is they click through, they look at who's viewed their profile, they might click through those profiles, they look at the homepage, they read some articles, and it's creating a habit of checking LinkedIn, which is what the company really wants. So you have all these different stages of the funnel, and the key thing is that each one is equally as important. And a lot of people get very distracted by acquisition. But in this super fancy math exercise that I did, you can see that in the base case, if you have 100 customers, 30% activation, 80% retention, $10 a customer, and you make $240. No matter where you double the funnel, whether it's acquisition, activation, or revenue, you end up with the same amount of money. And this is something that people often forget because it's really easy to focus on the top of funnel numbers, but there are often other areas of the funnel that are much more important to optimize. And what you really want to think about is where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. So if you're at a startup and you have limited resources, where do you focus if you've got this entire funnel that you should be looking at? And I think about ROI as a combination of impact, cost, and risk. So impact is not just moving the numbers, although that's obviously important. It's also how much you're going to learn. So the earlier the stage you're in, the more important the learning is. All numbers are small, so impact on numbers will be minor. Learning will be huge. How quickly can you reorient yourself away from the missed assumptions you have onto the right path? So in the early stages, I would prioritize learning over anything else because any number that you increase or decrease is going to be nothing compared to nailing the market or the channel or the product. Cost is a combination of time, money, and people. So depending on which you have more on, you can invest more in. And then risk is obviously how likely it will be to succeed. So the higher the risk, the more you should question it. And the key here, as I mentioned, for the impact is the always be learning. So what is your hypothesis? How will you confirm or invalidate it? And again, this sounds obvious, but even at Slac, I can tell you that we often do not do this. People have an idea, they think it's cool, and they go and invest, and then you say later, was that successful? Was it not? What did it mean? It's like, oh, I don't know. It seemed like a good idea at the time. So investing in the discipline to always ask these questions is really, really important. It's obvious, honestly, often the most obvious things that are the hardest to nail on the day-to-day basis. And then a final note about measurement is to find your Northstar. So there are a lot of metrics with the entire funnel, with running a company. Metrics don't really mean anything if you don't do anything about them, but you can't do everything about every metric. You've got to choose. A Northstar metric is a great thing to align a company around. So a Northstar metric is a metric that is indicative of the health and growth of your company that can't be gamified and it can't be influenced by spammy growth tactics. So it is often represents the growing value that your users receive. People often use activation type metrics for this because they will be a combination of both growth and value. So you're not limiting it to one or the other. At Slack, our Northstar metric is about activated teams. So that's how many work teams did we acquire who reached 3 users and 500 messages. And we often time bound that to a week because we need to be able to experiment off of it quickly. So we can't wait 6 months to figure it out. We need to know if we're improving that metric or decreasing it with every initiative we do. At LinkedIn, the Northstar metric was quality members. So this is about how many members did we acquire who have a minimum amount of their profile filled out and have a minimum number of connections. Because if you have a member who really just has to be an email address, if all they have is an email address, that's adding nothing to the value of the network. They need a profile that people can search for, find, connect to, and they need to connect to people so that they're strengthening that network. And so that was how LinkedIn defined it. Pretty much every company can have some type of activation metric. The key is that you have to be able to see it within a reasonably short period of time because otherwise you can't act on it. And that's one of the reasons why revenue is pretty much never a good metric for this because revenue is a very lagging indicator. Once you see that the revenue is going up and down, it's obviously something that occurred months ago and you can no longer do anything about. So speed is super important with this metric. You need to find it, measure it, monitor it, and then align your entire company around it because it's also most powerful when every team is goaling towards the same number versus having different goals that often compete. And that's it.
Hi, so I'm Amato. I'm like the cow guy here. So I was wondering, what was your...
Stanford, so I'll forget.
Oh, we're pretty much trying to be like Climate Corps, but for animals in a lot of different ways. So what was your Northstar metric over at Climate Corps? Because we pretty much followed everything that you just said because I hooked up with a lot of people from Climate Corps. I was like, what the hell did you do and what did you go wrong? But the Northstar metric, I'd love to hear what you guys did over there.
So how are you Climate Corps for animals?
Well, in the end, we just collected a lot of data and like we're actually doing actuarial tables. One of our use cases right now is underwriting the actuarial tables for livestock insurance with like different companies. So in a way, it's more the data acquisition side.
Gotcha.
So on there.
So while I was at Climate Corp, we didn't have a Northstar metric, and this is indicative of many of the challenges we had while I was there. But if I were to guess, I would say their Northstar metric would probably be something around the accuracy of the insurance products bought with the actual risk and then payouts. So what you don't want is people buying an insurance product that has nothing to do with their actual risk. They're going to become really dissatisfied over time. And what you really want is whenever they experience a loss, you want that insurance to trigger. And if they don't experience a loss, you don't want it to trigger. So the key about Climate Corp is that the payouts were based on weather, not losses. You could theoretically have a bad weather event, lose no money and still get a payout, or vice versa, which is just a bad match. So it would be something around that, matching the risk to the reward.
Hi, my name is Margot. I'm building a software platform that helps vacation rentals manage their customers, sort of like CRM for vacation rental companies. It's SMB. We have pretty decent product market fit, and we're growing through organic referrals. But we're not a Slack, we're not a Slack, right? We don't have like a super duper network effect, and it's hard for me to articulate the referral metrics. And so I was wondering if you have a few organic referral metrics that you look at that I might be able to use for a business like this.
So Slack is not actually powered by referrals that much. A lot of it is word of mouth, which you can't measure. You just assume that a certain percentage of people coming to the website and making teams are from word of mouth because, to be totally honest, you can't track them through any other method. Yeah. And we know that there is a lot of buzz about Slack in the system. So we don't have a robust formal referral program where it's like you sign up and then you get an email and then you forward it to people and we track all of that. There are some rules of thumb, which I don't have handy, and they vary a lot depending on if you're a consumer or a B2B business.
B2B.
Yeah, referrals are a lot more difficult for a B2B business. And in general, they end up being based more on payouts than they do based on any mutual benefit to people.
But if you're getting it without it, that's a good sign, right? So
It's
maybe
a
that's
very
something to
good
highlight.
sign.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very good sign if people are referring you without getting any reward on their own end. In general, I like referrals that reward people based on more value in the product. If you can structure your product that way, it's often not possible, but you refer somebody and you get to a higher tier of usage in the product or more features open up for you because it encourages good behavior.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks so much for this. I took so much value from your presentation. Thank you. And I'm Emilia. I'm building Content Tools, a content marketing platform for marketing teams to work and collaborate around content. So my question is about the Northstar metric regarding activation versus retention. Yeah. So you mentioned that your Northstar metric it's pretty similar to ours, actually, but we add another number for the amount, not only the amount of users on the platform, the amount of content on the platform, but also the usage and logins, etc. And we come up with sort of a customer happiness index like HubSpot. And so what do you think about that? Should the business like ours, SaaS, B2B, that concerns so much about LTV, should be using the Northstar metric and adding up retention metrics into that, or they should be separate?
Retention is really important. It's just how, the more complex it is, the more hard it is to understand what's really happening with that metric. So if you have a composite metric that's based on both activity as well as retention, and you see it starting to go up and down, you have to do a lot of work to start breaking it down and saying, what are the trends within each sub-metric and what's happening? So in general, the simpler the metric, the better, because people understand what it means versus something that's a vague composite number that in and of itself doesn't have any specific link to the product. That would be my biggest concern. A good Northstar metric is highly correlated with LTV and retention. So if you had an activity metric that didn't correlate with retention, I think the goal would be to find an activity metric that actually is very closely correlated with retention, and then you kill two birds with one stone. So at Slack, we did a lot of work to figure out what is the simplest set of numbers that people achieve at the earliest stage that is highly linked to upgrading to paid and continuing to use the product. So it was a lot of basically analytics work to get to that number.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, how's it going? I also have a question about the Northstar. I'm familiar with the concept, but I'm not sure how to implement it at my company. We are a home improvement marketplace that has a project management tool that allows the homeowner and the contractor to pretty much serve as their own project manager throughout the whole thing. So you mentioned two things that I thought were curious. Don't make your Northstar something that can be manipulated. So a lot of our acquisition comes through press, and then activation is a function of need. I just bought a house and I want to get it fixed up before I go on. Retention, however, is really hard for us to measure because you kind of get something done and you don't need it for a while, or it's the complete opposite where they try us out with something small and then they're like, well, since you didn't mess up my floors, I'd like you to completely gut my kitchen. But my question is, what's the process that I should go through to figure out how to name my Northstar?
So that's a tricky one. You have a product which has a natural, very low engagement rate, right? Where you'd say maybe once a year is what you'd be going for. If people are really like to redo things, maybe
once
less.
Every 7 years.
So, I mean, this is a little bit out of scope, but my first question would be, are you going to be able to acquire enough customers at a cheap enough rate to maintain a business when they're only using you once every 7 years?
So two answers to that. One is our acquisition cost is around $30, and our average take on that customer would be $3,000. So the lifetime value is kind of high, and also 7 years is like the industry average, but 40% of our customers come back to us inside of 6 months.
So that's a very strong metric right there. But I think what you're going to be looking at is the activate, not so much retention, but more of the actual usage rate of the people who start using your product. So I'm not sure what your acquisition flow is, but I suspect that people can poke the tires and not really do anything.
Exactly.
Which is failure to activate, right?
Yep.
So what is the point of almost no return where they're actually giving you some amount of money? And that may take a few months, depending on what your product is like. And if it does, what is a much earlier indicator that is very highly correlated with them giving you money, even if it's not them actually giving you the money? And that's the metric that you really want to find. And again, this ends up just being about a lot of number crunching and regression analysis often to get to those numbers. But is there a set of kick the tire activities that are highly correlative with becoming a paying customer? And can you find those?
Yeah, I appreciate that because there is. I just never thought about it. Thank you.
Hi, Jahan Thompson from Swivel Beauty. I wanted to ask you more about experimentation when it comes to growth strategies, and if you can kind of speak more on what you've done at Slack in terms of what's worked, what hasn't, how you actually think about setting up growth strategy experiments to figure out what's the right lane to go down.
Yeah. So we've done more experimentation on the activation and onboarding side, and we're just starting on the pure growth side this year. We spent most of 2017 setting up the infrastructure for things versus being able to rapidly run experiments. So on the activation side, first of all, it started with a lot of customer research of understanding why people were doing certain things. And the challenge that Slack has been going through in the last year, I'd say maybe year and a half, is we've grown really rapidly off of originally a small base. Our early adopters and the people who first created teams were almost all engineering, dev, tech folks in Bay Area. They look just like the people at Slack, so we really understood them. But as Slack expands throughout the country, internationally, and in order to maintain those growth rates, we really got to reach out beyond the pure engineering community. And not only that, we have to make the case for companies to expand Slack wall to wall and not only pay for it with their engineering teams, which requires understanding the mindset of people a lot more and what some of their concerns were. So one example was, it's so easy to start a Slack team. You just enter your email address. We don't need any education. We don't need anything. It's not like an enterprise product where you have to go through sales. So the website should just have a big CTA and that's it. And if you go to the Slack website, there's actually still very little content on it. But the reality is that yes, you can set up that Slack team and then you have the easy task of saying, hey, everybody I work with, get off email, change the entire way you work. I promise it will be super awesome. That's a high bar. That's a lot of friction for anybody who doesn't feel really strongly about it and who doesn't necessarily have as much social capital as a very well-paid engineer at a startup. So recognizing that difference in psychology and then saying, okay, what do we need to do to give them more confidence? What do we need to do to remove the questions and barriers was actually a big journey that Slack itself had to go on. In terms of experiments, there's the classic of like, we needed to set up an experiment testing framework, which was on the engineering side. One of the challenging things is how do you scope an experiment so that it doesn't take you 3 months to run an experiment that ends up being just a total failure? Like, what is the experiment you could run in 2 weeks that is good enough that it actually does give you information? Because the flip side, if you run an experiment that's really scrappy and it fails and people are like, well, it was crap, so of course it failed. That doesn't tell you anything either. So building a quick but accurate experiment is actually very, very challenging. And we are still working on that, to be honest. What is the minimum viable experiment we can run that we'll have confidence in the results? The only other thing I'll say is that at Slack and many companies, we've actually gotten really tripped up on the results of the experiment. So one example is we did all of these onboarding and education experiments, and none of them were moving the needle, and we couldn't understand it. Some of them seemed really obvious that it would have a positive effect and would just be nothing. And then one of our, I think it was an analyst, very clever analyst, said, what if we separated out the people who have already created a Slack team, so this is their second or third Slack team, from the people who are newly creating their Slack teams, which now sounds really obvious, but we did not think about. Turns out, wildly different results if you separate those populations. We've also had challenges based on, do you run an experiment based on an individual or based on a team? Also drastically changes the results. So figuring out how to interpret experiment results is not a small thing. We could perpetually get it wrong at Slack. And it will mess up all of your insights for a very long time. We had to go back and rerun just dozens and dozens of experiments based on that realization. And I'm sure there are many more that we haven't figured out that we are currently doing wrong. So I I don't have any brilliant answers. The only other thing I'll say is that one of the smallest, tiniest things we did had one of the largest impacts, which is Slack has a help center with more content on it than the website by far, which is pretty classic for a company. A lot of visitors to it, really good SEO, and it runs off of Zendesk, so it's not actually a part of our website. So we said, what if you put create a team CTA on this help center, which took about 2 minutes to do, and it had the biggest impact on growth on anything we've done in a year, and was by far the most ridiculous thing that we did. Effort and reward are not linked often. So that was both triumphant and very painful for me, because I was like, what have I been doing all this time? I'm looking for more experiments like that.
Thank you.
We're good. We have 10 more minutes, so we can do these a little faster. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Come on up.
Yes. Thank you very much, Rachel. The product is awesome. My name is Joel, and I'm founder of Tumelo, and we're a podcasting application/platform. And I had 2 questions for you. The first one was regarding product market fit. You say that you got to get a product market fit before you scale. But then how do you measure that? Do you look at the number of signups? Do you look at the time spent on the site, at least for something like us, like podcasting? Do you look at the number of time people listen, the number of time people are coming back? So what are the certain metrics that can tell you I have good product market fit, now I can focus on scaling?
Yeah, so with a podcast, it's going to be more about content, right? Because the concept of a podcast is already pretty well established. So then that would be, what's your podcast, what's your estimated audience size, and can you get those people to actually listen? And I would think for a podcast, it would be, do they listen to a certain number of the podcasts in any series? Because if they listen to one and never come back, then you really haven't nailed the content. But if they listen to a half a dozen, you've probably got something pretty good.
And then my second question was on the experiment side of things. How much should you invest into putting in place a testing infrastructure if you're still at that product market fit testing stage? Because let's say if you build a very complex thing, you can't just use an out of the box infrastructure testing framework and just plug it in. You have to kind of like build it your own because your product is very customized and complex. So how much investment should you put into that early on?
Early on, I would say nothing. So because your numbers are going to be small too, out of the box or qualitative, but you should be able to find an out of the box solution that would work. You want to invest in the product you're building, not in the tools that somebody else has spent a lot more time building. So I'm much more about buy until you are large enough to justify building.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I found it really valuable. I'm Bhavneet from Go Skills. We do online education. I also have 2 questions. The first around the Northstar. So you sort of alluded to looking at your analytics. My question is, do you guess what that Northstar metric might be and then experiment against it? Or do you look at your data and try to pick out sort of the common things that people that convert do? And
the second.
Okay.
Definitely.
And if so, what tools do you use to run that data analytics?
Is that your second question?
No, I have another question, sorry.
Okay, what's your second question?
Okay, my second question was around, you said that your channel had changed to a field sales channel. When did that change for Slack, and what was the trigger to change that channel?
So when we realized that we needed to go after the agriculture market and we started to focus on research on that market, we quickly discovered how traditional it was, how mistrustful of technology, California, the Bay Area, and how linked to their traditions in terms of like literally the generations of crop insurance folks is a real thing. It became very obvious that we would have to leverage those relationships and no outside company was ever going to break in. So that's how it became clear through the customer research.
Sorry, was that for Slack or?
That was for Climate Corp, the field sales. Slack does online acquisition pretty much only.
Oh, so you don't have a field sales?
We do for upgrading to paid, but that's once people are already acquired to Slack. We upgrade existing teams to paid, so they're mining our existing customer base.
Okay. And sorry, the question around the tool?
I was hoping you could, if they were related, you could fold them in.
Oh, sorry, no, they were not related.
We don't use a tool. It's literally just mining the data through regression analysis. So I guess SQL, but we don't. There's not a specific tool. It's just math.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Shalom, Rachel. I'm Gabe. Question for you. Number 1, do you do advisory work with startups on your free time?
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes, okay, cool. I'll send you an email later. Second question here. When you were talking about the channel acquisition, it really resonated. We failed pretty hard on the channel side. We spent a lot of money on advertising that didn't work. We're in low volume, higher price. My question to you is there a resource center or a place that I can try to acquire more information to match up my price points, my products, and the right channel I should be acquiring them on or selling them through?
Not that I know of. I mean, there's a pretty well-established framework, and I forget what it's called, but it uses animals about rabbits, elephants, mice, blah, blah, blah. But the basic rule of thumb is that the more expensive you are, the more high touch you have to be, and the less expensive you are, the more kind of sales at scale you can do. It depends on your price point. What's your price point?
$3,000 to $5,000.
Okay, so that's kind of the SMB level, which means that you can do things mostly low touch with like minimal sales engagement. So you would use ads and online things mostly as an educational channel, and then you use a human being to just tip them over the edge versus outbound, like pure outbound mining. Brian Balfour has a whole thing on this, so I would look up his site. He's got like one little graph with a lot of cute little animals on it, which kind of speaks to it.
And that educational center you said, that's like giving them thought leadership, some type of freemium offering?
Yeah, so on a website, the classic thing is a resource center that has case studies, white papers, customer stories, infographics, whatever it may be. It's just a way for people to gain more confidence and understand what solution you're offering a little bit better.
Any preference on gated or ungated for that?
Ungated.
Cool. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. I think this answer can be, I think the answer to this could be attached to planning projects and the impact, cost, and ROI. But I founded a company. We're basically a crowdfunding platform that helps students raise money for college, and all of the money students raise go directly to their school. We want to basically convert from the normal crowdfunding model to a SaaS model, basically having students apply to thousands of scholarships through a single common application. But obviously the hurdle we had was when we're talking to all of these companies is, well, we want to see users, right? So we need to focus on the activation, right? So not only are we getting signups, but students who are actively fundraising on the platform so that we can come back and say, hey, these are the users that would most likely be the ones applying to your scholarship. So I'm wondering like when we should not really pivot, but when we should focus on the acquisition of those corporate partners and then actually activating those corporate partners. Because right now we have to be kind of focused on getting our student signups up as well as getting them to activate and actually engage with our platform.
Yeah, so that's a classic marketplace problem. Okay. Marketplaces are tough. They're both tough and then really powerful once you get them going, but they're powerful because they're so hard to get going. And so generally with a marketplace, there's one side that is much harder to drive than the other. The question is, which side is that? It is often the business side, not the consumer side. If it is the business side, the point is to focus on the business and then the consumers will come. So eBay had this challenge, Uber had this challenge, LinkedIn on its monetization side had this challenge. And the key is figuring out which side. You cannot focus on both, just scalably. Nobody's able to do that. Normally one will drive the other. So it's figuring that out, and I think it's probably the business side for you so that you can offer the students something powerful.
100%. Thank you.